Welcome to That Business Show 2.0. I'm your host, JB Maloney, where business becomes show business. On today's program, I want to talk about the world of stand-up comedy and how that could be used, to get to that level of influencer in your community or in your business, because it's an area where I think a lot of people could actually find some benefit from if they would just have the guts to get on stage and talk in front of an audience. I myself did some stand-up comedy about 10, actually it's been longer than 10 years now, about 13, 14 years ago. Never anything professional, just local amateur stand-up comedy, but it's a thrill like no other, and even if you don't make people laugh, it instills in you the confidence that you can do anything in front of an audience at that point. And so, if you could just find a way to remove embarrassment from your feelings and your own personality and your own consciousness, you'd be amazed at what you can accomplish. And that's not just within comedy and public speaking, but anything that you do in your personal life and in business. Quit worrying about what other people think of you. And the ultimate test of that is getting on stage and speaking to an audience and trying to make them laugh. It's hard enough for people to try to speak in front of an audience and tell them information in a boring monotone voice, let alone trying to get the audience to laugh. And so stand-up comedy is an area that I enjoyed immensely, had a lot of fun at it, and I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about that on the program. So how did I find the world of stand-up comedy? Why would I even consider doing something like that? I've always been kind of a comical individual. It doesn't come out on this program because I keep the show kind of a very professional tone, but amongst my friends, I'm always, thinking of jokes or cracking jokes, and I'm a huge lover of watching stand-up comedy. A couple of my all-time favorites, probably Jeff Foxworthy, whose idea of dumb Southerners was kind of brought back to the forefront here this recent storm. And it's funny because Jeff Foxworthy jokes about he's a Southern guy and how that Southerners are not dumb people. It's just that whenever disaster strikes, we cannot help but keep the dumbest from amongst us off the television set. It's like when the hurricane hits, it finds the trailer park and the news media rolls out. They find the 500-pound woman in a muumuu and hair curlers in her hair. And she's like, well, it was pan-delirium. I thought we'd be killed or something worse. And during this whole storm, all I could think about was Dolores. I still had my casserole dish. So that's one of my favorite lines from Jeff Foxworthy, a great Southern comedian, part of the Blue Collar Comedy group as well. But it just, I was thinking about that during this storm and all the people that are on the media and stuff. And you're right, they don't always get the most intelligent from amongst us on the television set when disaster strikes. But nonetheless, it's important to remember to be comical in all situations and find humor in that with what we do. And so stand-up comedy is something I love greatly. I still dabble, with ideas from time to time. I'd like to get back on stage and do that here, and I probably will here again fairly soon. But it's an excellent way to differentiate yourself and get your message out to the community, and especially if you revolve it around your business in some way. And so it's up to you to find, a course that works with a listenership. But nonetheless, even if they don't laugh, even if nothing comes of it, you'll then have no fear in ever talking to a crowd once you do that. And even some of your greatest comedians bombed multiple times on stage. Jerry Seinfeld is an excellent example of this, because Jerry Seinfeld, if you've ever, his show is amazing, the best sitcom ever produced on television, but his stand-up is not highly impressive in my opinion. It's very uniquely funny, and it's very intricate in its detail, but it's not laugh out loud funny. And so his audience that he appeals to took much more time to grow, because he's just not a naturally funny person. He looked for the intricacies in life, and one of my favorite ones was how he points out the difference or the fears of public speaking and the fear of death, for instance. The number one fear of all people is the fear of public speaking. The second greatest fear is the fear of death. So what that means is at a funeral, more people would rather be in the casket than on the stage giving the eulogy. That type of intricacy is not easily observed by the typical individual, but yet it's funny, but it's not laugh out loud funny, such as the likes of a Chris Rock or a Kevin Hart, who simply, when they start to talk, it's funny because of their tone and the inflection in their voice. And the Dave Chappelle's, those people, they could sit there and recite the national anthem, and they could just put a little twinge in their voice, and it would be funny. So they have that natural advantage, the people that have that comical tone to their voice. But Jerry Seinfeld even admittedly states during the 80s he was bombing every other show until he finally, pitched his idea to NBC and got picked up by the network. And his ideas in comedy translated so well to the screen. And so it wasn't as effective in stand-up format as it was in sitcom format. And Seinfeld, 9 seasons, and I've watched each episode at least a couple of dozen times. I leave it on in the evenings on reruns. It's a pure genius. But the point of the matter is, had Jerry Seinfeld been afraid of embarrassment, he would never have gotten to the level that he did. He didn't care what other people thought, to within reason. Obviously, he took the feedback and the critiques, but I mean, he cared to that degree. But he didn't let that stop him. He did not let the fear of not getting laughs keep him from the stage. And that's the way you got to be in life and the way you got to be in business. And if you get on stage and try to make people laugh, you'd be amazed at what it instills in you as an individual. And like I said, even though I didn't necessarily kill it every time on stage, I had good nights, I had bad nights, but on average I had just mediocre nights where you're on stage from 3 to 5 minutes and you get a couple of laughs. I had some great nights where it was just like 5 minutes of nonstop laughs, and I've had 5 minutes of nonstop silence as well. But when you do that, nothing scares you at that point in business. You'll talk in front of anybody. You'll talk, in any given time. When I was doing, on live radio, the show now is pre-recorded, but when I was doing live radio, people would come into the studio and they'd be scared to death about going on live radio. And I was like, why are you scared? You're just sitting here talking to me. And so even that instills fear in the people. But comedy gives you a sense of empowerment unlike anything else. And so get out there, and if you have any inkling whatsoever of getting on stage and doing any type of comedy, I highly encourage you to do that. So how did I find comedy, and what was my interest in the entire thing? It's I was a naturally comical individual, and then in 2004, Last Comic Standing was coming to Tampa Bay, and so I decided to go audition for that. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Like I said, I'd never even been on a comedy stage before, but I had a lot of material, and I thought, I got some stuff here. I'm gonna put this together, and I'm gonna make a bit out of this. So they came to the Tampa Improv. I got to the Improv around 5 o'clock in the morning, and by then the line was already around the building and halfway down the block, and it was about a 7-hour wait before I got into line. And talk about feeling small. I'm in line here with a bunch of comedians, and I'm not naturally funny with people I don't know. I'm kind of shy and quiet until I get to know people. And so I'm in line just kind of minding my own business, and these people are just joke after joke and just off the top of their head type of stuff too. And that's when you really become a valuable comic, is when you learn or naturally, I think it's more natural, but it can be perfected through learning improv skills without even having to pre-plan a set. And so we've talked on this program about improv skills within business. It's something that I'd like to take classes in, and something that can really help you build your business and help you in development and negotiations. And so got, stood in line for about 7 hours, and they were throwing people out left and right. I mean, there was hundreds and hundreds of people in line, and you got up to like a minute or so, and they told you to have like 3 minutes of material. So I had 3 minutes of material, but they were throwing people out within about a 7 to 10 second period. And so I was like, there's no way I'm going to last here. I'm with all these professionals here, and I'm like, here I am going into in front of the producers for Jay Leno's show. They were the judges judges at the time. And so I got into the stage and I got into my bit, and I remember my opening line was at that time was always, my name is Jamie Maloney, from West Virginia. And I can't remember exactly how I used to say it, but it was something along the lines of, I knew I needed to leave West Virginia when I took the You Might Be a Redneck If quiz, because I scored 98% on that thing, and so I had to leave. So I said something along those lines, because Jeff Foxworthy did the You Might Be a Redneck If lines, and so I was like, I took that test and I scored 98%, so I knew I had to leave West Virginia. And so that one always got a laugh, depending on how I told it, or if I said it right and had the right tone and inflection. I'll talk about that in the second segment, kind of the mechanics of what a comedian is doing on stage. But so I got like a minute into this routine. The first joke is the only one I even remember. There's jokes I knew I used to tell back in the day that I'm embarrassed to even admit I even got on stage and even tried to tell, just because they're either vulgar or they don't fit my personality anymore. And they're all on DVD, and I refuse to watch them just because I've aged and my personality has changed. But got about a minute into the routine, and the judges stopped me, and they were laughing too, and they asked me how long I'd been doing comedy. And I said, it's my first time on stage. And they were kind of mystified. They're like, whoa, you're way too good for your first time on stage. So had I lied and said, oh yeah, I've been doing this for years, I got all kinds of material, this and that, I would have gotten the call back to the next stage, which was to perform in front of a live audience that night at the Tampa Improv. But because I didn't know at the time, they were looking for, mid-carders, feature acts that were looking to move into headliners or headliners in the business. I didn't have the material to stand a chance, and they knew that. And so they, politely told me to, practice the craft, go out there, learn it, come back, and you could probably, do pretty good in this business. You just got to work on it, of which I did, and I'll talk about that when I come back from the break, and some of the mechanics and what I learned in comedy and how you can implement that in your general writing and business skills as well, because humor breaks so many boundaries. You're listening to That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. And we're back to That Business Show 2.0, where business becomes a show business. Talking today about how to incorporate comedy into your life in one form or another. And I'm talking about just being on stage as an amateur stand-up comedian. And if you have the wherewithal whatsoever to even experience that, please do. And if you could find a way to just remove the embarrassment from your personality and that fear of getting on stage, after that, you'll have no fear of ever talking in front of another audience, because once you stand in front of hundreds of people and try to make them laugh and they don't laugh, nothing scares you in terms of public speaking at that point. So I came out of the experience at the Tampa Improv, and I felt good. I mean, I got rejected, of course, but I kind of expected that to begin with. And I started to learn how the comedy scene worked around Tampa. And in Tampa, unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of stage time to develop. There were side splitters, which is still here. They had open mic every Thursday, and you had to pay $20. They gave you up to 5 minutes of time on the stage. The Tampa Improv had a monthly open mic contest that was just a general night in front of about 15 different comics. And McCurdy's was a club down in Sarasota, but that was really it. And there was a few small little places that had some time available. But that was one of the problems with Tampa, is there just wasn't stage time to perfect your craft. I can remember listening to Chris Rock one time talk about his early days in comedy, and he said, you had to be on stage every single night somewhere, and the only places you could do that were like New York, LA, Chicago, places that had, comedy clubs that were running, 7 days a week into the middle of the nights, and he'd be on stage, 3 o'clock in some waste of a life bar. 3 people in the audience, all drunk. One of them passed out, and he'd be sitting there or standing there doing material for them. And so that's the type of commitment that you had to have in stand-up comedy. And fortunately for him, he grew to a tremendous brand in stand-up comedy. But the average comedian is living out of their car, driving from city to city, making about $400 or $500 for the weekend, and then driving to the next show. They may or may not be put up in a hotel room by the club. They may be, getting the extra room in the club or something. It's a very lonely life. It's fun, while you're young and doing this thing, but if you can't break out and become a major headliner, it can be a very lonely life outside of the clubs, as I come to find out just in talking with a lot of different comedians as they traveled the country. But they book their own shows, they call the clubs, but the first stage of the entire thing is, of course, there's open mic. You got to, before you ever become a paid act, you're going to have to do open mic. Nobody's ever going to hire you as a professional without substantial, amateur experience. And then that first step is to become what they call a feature act. And then the feature act is the person who always opens up the club in a typical night in comedy. You have the MC who comes up, usually does about 15 minutes or so max. If they have an open mic a night, then they'll have the open micers come up. That's usually club specific and maybe just once a week. But sometimes they have the amateurs. Then you have the feature act come up. They're going to do 20 minutes of time, and then you got your headliner who's going to of course close the show, and they're going to do about 45 to 50 minutes of time. So you're trying to find that 20 minutes of solid material to become a feature act, and 20 minutes of time is a long time. And the typical comedian that I talked with said it took them about 2 years of regular on air or regular on stage performances to find that tight 20 minutes of stage time to begin getting paid for. And even then, it's constantly evolving, and you got to constant, especially if it's topical or anything related to current events. That's the toughest type of comedy to do, because you got to be constantly working in new material. If you've got material that is news specific, then that's a very difficult business to be in. Even your late night comedians, of course Jay Leno's not there anymore. What's his name there, and those guys. But what I'm saying is, those jokes are being written by other people and sent to them, and then either the writers or people send those things in. The community can send those in. Jay Leno, or of course not Jay Leno anymore, but the night, the Conan and all those guys, they're not writing their own material. It's just too difficult to be that funny continually. You got to have help from people. So comedians taking 2 years to write 20 minutes of material, enough that is getting them paid. And what is the format of writing comedy? And I would go to comedy writing workshops, and I would spend a Saturday in there. About 10 comedians from the area would come in there, and we do a writing workshop. And they teach you this this format for comedy, how a comedy should flow. And it's set up punch, set up punch, set up punch, tag, set up punch, set up punch, set up punch, callback. And so a tag is a one line that goes on to that is a punchline followed by another punchline that tags that joke. And a callback is one of the most valuable portions of a comedian's arsenal. It's when they call back to a prior joke in their arsenal, because that is unexpected. People can do setup and punch, and a lot of times people can kind of guess where they're going with the setup and punch, but whenever they can implement good callbacks, those are unexpected, and those get the best types of laughs. So setup line punch, setup line punch, setup line punch, tag, setup punch, setup punch, setup punch, callback. And you want to be able to hit your punchlines 7 to 10 seconds. If you've got a minute before a punchline, it's never going to work. And even if it's a great story and a great punchline, 60 seconds, you're going to bore your audience to death. So you got to have material that is 7 to 10 seconds between punchlines. And you got to know how to work in the areas of tone, inflection, and timing. Those are the 3 speaking skills that comedians know how to master. Also, stage presence is important. Just how you present yourself on stage, from where the mic stand is, and how you present and walk, or you shouldn't really walk across the stage. You want to plant yourself in a location, take the mic stand, put it behind you, unless you're going to talk into the mic with the mic in the mic stand, which is not usually advisable. It's best to take it out of the mic stand and put that thing behind you. Don't put it in front of you, because then that upstages you, and it just looks awkward. Anytime you see a speaker that takes a microphone out of the mic stand and leaves the thing in front of them, it just looks really bad. And so inflection and timing and then tone, those are the 3 most important things right there. You could have tremendous material, but if it can't be delivered properly, it's going to fail. And so I myself would, and this is where I think I suffered from in comedy, I would write good material, but I lacked inflection and tone because I have a very monotone speaking voice. And so it was hard for me to get a lot of the material over. And so the only way I found to get my material over is kind of to dumb it down and do more of a southern type of an accent, which I didn't want to have to do. I like to be natural. But for me, like I said, I kind of suffered from that Jerry Seinfeld type of mentality, the kind of the boring white guy who's smart, and yeah, that's witty, but it's not something that's laugh out loud funny. And so when you are boring and monotone in your presentation, then you've got to have even stronger material than the comedians who have those abilities with tone, inflection, and ultimately with timing. And so I was on stage for about probably 60, maybe 70 different times. And my first experience in front of a live audience outside of the Tampa Improv Last Comic Standing event was at Side Splitters, and the headliner that evening was Al Romas. And that was one of my best nights. My first downstage was one of my best nights. Had a couple of friends who had came out with me and did some open mic. I remember the MC at the time, Maury something. I forget his name now off the top of my head. He is a radio show host up in Ohio now. Funny guy. This guy was doing MC work, and every night he had like new material, and it was just great. And I told you, I come in there, I said, I want to do some comedy night. He took one look at me and started laughing. He said, you want to do comedy? I was like, yeah. He said, all right. He said, I'll give you 5 minutes. So went up there and then just crushed it my first time up, and he even, complimented me. He said, all right, great job, man. You impressed me. You shocked me. And so then that night, sitting in the crowd, just listening to the rest of the acts, and Al Romas even came up, and he did a callback to one of my jokes. And that's where headliners are really good, because a good headliner will listen to the acts that come before them. They'll listen to the feature act and then the amateurs and the MCs, and they'll use callbacks to their jokes. And that's comic genius right there, when they can call back to other jokes that were told earlier in the night. Because again, it's unexpected, it's not predictable, and it catches audiences off guard. Every person that's out there in the audience while you are talking is trying to guess what you're going to say. At least all the guys are, because all the guys out there in the audience are telling their girlfriends, that's the material. I'm better than this guy. I got better jokes than this guy. They're all judging you, at least at the amateur and feature act level. The headliners probably get a different level of respect. I don't know. I was never there. But when you're an amateur or you're an entry level comic, all the guys out there think that they're funnier than you, and they're telling their girlfriends that, I got better material than this guy. My joke about that's so much better than this guy's type of a joke. And so you want to be able to use callbacks and tags efficiently, because they catch audiences off guard and they're going to make them laugh. And so brilliant form of comedy, again, are those who can use those effectively. But getting back to what I was saying just a second ago, Al Romas called back to one of my jokes earlier in the evening, looked out for me. I was like, where is that guy? Is he even still here? And then pointed me out into the crowd and said, great job, and asked me how long I'd been doing comedy too. And again, I told him first time, and it was nice to, somebody of the likes of Al Romas, who is a comedy, a regular headliner, been in the business for probably 20, 25 years or so now. So very rewarding to get a compliment like that from somebody in the industry at just an entry level age at that point. And so I would have gone on to do more comedy. Stage time was lacking, and I considered leaving the area and going to New York to try to do it on a more regular schedule. But a commitment like that is a very broad and very scary type of a commitment to make, to go to a major city to try to become a comedian, something very few people succeed at least on a grand level. But for those who get to succeed in comedy and go out and tell jokes for a living, I truly admire them. They have one of the greatest lives that one could ever want. Given again, the ones who are on the upper echelon. All the other comedians who are working and traveling from town to town, those guys are hardworking people, and they're just making pennies, in my opinion, for the skill and the art that they put out there. So again, remember to incorporate comedy into everything that you do, and get on stage and talk in front of people. You'll never fear speaking in front of people ever again. Remember to find humor in everything that we do. You've been listening to That Business Show 2.0 with Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business.